Hey, good afternoon, everybody. Because we've just clicked over 12 o'clock. My name is Mark Turner, and I'm going to be taking you through the last of SSEN's Climate Academy sessions for this time round. We're going to cover the issue of waste, resource efficiency, and the circular economy. We'll have about 3/4 of an hour of talk, and then we'll have time for some questions. So this is me. I, on behalf of the Supply Chain Sustainability School, look after two areas. I look after facilities management, but I also look after a group, a large group of the school's 160 partners that focuses on the issue of waste and resource use. And that's become a really kind of active group, particularly looking at the areas around resource efficiency and how we can design out waste, really thinking about, futuristic and more forward-thinking ways of taking that forward. So the outcomes that we're hoping for by the end of this webinar are that you'll have revisited SSE's and SSEN's strategic priorities on waste, resource efficiency and the circular economy. Have an understanding of what's actually influencing these themes as well. And you'll have begun to consider ways of how you can introduce circular ways of working or more circular ways of working within your own work. And we'll dig into that issue of circular as we go through the webinar. Lastly, and I think this is an important one, you'll be able to explain the challenges and the opportunities to your customers and supply chains. So under fire, hopefully you'll be able to have a couple of things at the very least that you can say that are useful in that context and that will help you in those discussions and explaining benefits. Got a few general ground rules for today, not many, but due to the size of the audience, unfortunately, we do have to mute microphones and switch off your cameras. However, we have got a Q&A facility, so if you've got any questions or comments or indeed good ideas, anything you can put down, please put those down in the Q&A, and what we'll do is when I finish presenting and we've come through that side of the event, we'll answer as many of those as possible, and those that we don't get to answer we will pick up afterwards. We're going to also conduct some polls using Zoom, and I'll explain this in a moment. It's very, very simple. And just so you know, you don't need to take notes in particular or anything else, because you'll get a copy of this recording, and which you can share with colleagues. Well, also a copy of the slides at the end, so all of that will come through for you in due course. We do need feedback, and we'll send you a link for feedback. We'll put that into the Q&A, and we'll also put that link through at the end for you. We really value the feedback to try and get these right. I know that SSEN look really closely at that feedback as well. Okay, now we move to poll questions, and so we're going to have our first poll questions of the afternoon. So this one just says, it's trying to assess your level of knowledge. So we want to know how much you genuinely think you know about waste, resource efficiency, and the circular economy. And, focus that across all three rather than just thinking about one. So give your answer and let's see what we come up with. Right, so a decent level of knowledge, that suggests, but quite a range of levels. So that we're going to be pitching this whole thing right from the kind of the ground up. So hopefully that will meet all needs. Apologies to people telling you things that perhaps you're aware of already, but hopefully everybody will get something from this session. So let's go with our second question. This is an interesting one. Does your organisation currently have plans in place for waste, resource efficiency and the circular economy? And again, focusing on all three of those issues rather than just thinking about waste. Okay. So the bulk of you do, but some of you don't, and that's kind of useful to know because it's very, very important. The kind of planning side of things is critical. So hopefully we'll get into some of that, and thank you for that. So we'll now close that out, and without further ado, I'm going to introduce Rebecca Richardson, who's Director of Procurement and Commercial at SSEN Distribution, and Rebecca's going to say a few words to you. Rebecca.
Good morning, everybody. Thanks, Mark, and a warm welcome to all of you. I'm Rebecca Richardson, and I'm the Director of Procurement and Commercial at SSEN Distribution. For those of you who don't know who we are one of the 6 companies across Great Britain that own and manage the electricity distribution networks. Our networks cover Northern Scotland, South Central England, and we carry electricity to over 3.8 million homes and businesses. We're serious about accountability for our contribution to climate change, and we know to save the planet, we must go beyond the bare minimum. And yesterday's IPCC report confirms that the small window of opportunity for this is closing. And that's why we are leading the way by setting accredited science-based targets to tackle carbon reduction. It's why we're pushing boundaries and developing nature-based solutions to bridge the gap to net zero. And it's why we're creating ambitious waste targets to reduce the strain on the world's resources. Our ambition is to send zero waste to landfill, and we aim to achieve a recycling, recovery and reuse rate of more than 90% across our direct waste streams by 2028. In addition, we aspire to work towards a similar goal in relation to the waste generated by our supply chain, whilst they're providing the goods, works and services on our behalf. To add to this challenge, we know that this has to be achieved at an acceptable cost to our customers, both in the short and the long term. Now, if we look at some of the items that we dispose of, we know that we have some waste that offers challenges. For instance, take the creosote impregnated wood poles. And that's where the concept of the circular economy is particularly important. And that's because of the emphasis on the project design and delivery that really seek to reduce the use of raw materials or the parts that can't be maintained, reused or recycled. And as part of that, that's why the work that we will do and continue to do to develop our supplier sustainability code in consultation with our suppliers, and the further work to embed the principles of the circular economy is so critical. There's a lot of evidence to then demonstrate that this approach, the circular economy, actually saves money, which is fantastic, and there's some great examples that we've seen in the pharmaceutical industry. As I mentioned, we recognise that the supply chain and our delivery partners play a fundamental role in helping us to achieve our net zero to waste landfill aspiration. And that's why we've worked with the Supply Chain Sustainability School to make these Climate Academy sessions available to yourselves. Over 2,000 of my colleagues attended these same sessions last year, and we've found them so useful in increasing our climate literacy. We really do hope that you find them just as helpful as you plan your own journeys towards net zero. So thank you all for attending, and thank you to the Supply Chain Sustainability School in helping to put this together. So I'll pass back to Mark now to then tell us more about waste, resource efficiency and the circular economy.
Thanks a lot, Rebecca, much appreciated. Some really important messages there from SSEN. I'm sure you appreciate a challenging target that they're setting and ambitions not just for themselves but to work with their supply chain as well. So you know, if you're out there in the existing SSEN supply chain, you know, you can really help by what you do, and the not only the firm forms you deliver but the standard information you can provide to your customer SSEN. And if you're looking to get on that supply chain, it applies just as much, because the way you present that is really going to help. Okay, just a little bit of talk about something the Supply Chain Sustainability School does. I mentioned that we have a waste and resource use category group, and some of the things we've been doing over the last year, we've got a platform where we're able to show all the areas where unwanted or unused construction materials can actually go to have a better life, because sadly a lot of that material still ends up in skips, because despite all the planning that we go into, there is consistent over ordering or material that isn't quite right for the process. So there are opportunities to get a better fate for that material. We conducted surveys. We went at the heart of lockdown. We entered into a really significant survey with our school partners to understand their knowledge around plastic waste and wasting the packaging side of things. And the findings were quite scary, really, because we found that not a lot of even our partners were particularly advanced in their kind of understanding of the packaging and the plastics that were arriving at their sites and moving through their projects. So we began some work on that, and I'll touch on that as we go through the presentation. Another thing we've done, and we will continue to do, and I'll touch on this again later on, is produce lots and lots of case studies. And anybody can be a member of the school. It's free to be a member of the school. So if you have a great case study around waste and the way in which you've reduced waste or become more resource efficient or gone for a more circular way of working, please bring it forward, because those help other people like you and other organisations like you to improve as well. They also put your name out there, so it's very important. One further thing we've done is we're in the process of launching a whole section of the school which will focus around reducing project life cycle waste. So thinking about waste reduction through the whole lifetime of a project, right from the design, conception, pre-construction, right through to demolition and all the rest of it. So working right the way through, giving practical examples. So having said all that, fantastically ambitious stuff, I'll come back to basics and just ask the question, what is waste? Who's interested in waste? And I tend to like to start these things with this definition from the Waste Framework Directive, which is, one of the kind of presents we inherited from the EU. And you can see in that quotation there, it says, any substance or object that the holder discards or intends to, or is required to discard. And one thing that comes through loud and clear there is that the word discard is used twice. And discard suggests that that stuff has no value, that material has no value, that people want away with it, organisations want away with it. And of course, the new way of thinking is actually that's not the case. We are talking about resources here, perhaps resources in the wrong place at the wrong time. We need to turn that around and make better use of our resources. So as the question, waste or resources? And what I would now like to kind of do is just ask you another Zoom poll question, which is, does your own organisation currently have a waste reduction target? Okay, thank you. So yes, no, maybe we've got there, but just over 50% yes. This is a really critical thing, because if you can actually develop a target, you've got something to aim for. You can set yourself a target of what good looks like and work towards that, and start thinking of the waste that you generate more as resources that maybe you can kind of eliminate those at source, or at the very least use or recycle, and we'll come to that as well. So just moving on, let's do a little bit of legislation. We're not going to go heavy into legislation in this presentation, because it's probably more focused on the practice that we can undertake and the new way we can think. But it's important to kind of see where we're coming from with regard to the history of legislation. And with that in mind, the first piece I'd like to kind of pick up on is the EPA, the Environmental Protection Act of 1990. And that was critical in the sense that it was the first time that the language changed from waste disposal to waste management. So you're getting the kind of that glimmer of a suggestion that you're not just getting rid of something nasty, but you're actually going to manage something and manage it in a healthy, safe and effective way. Then we take a real big step on with the Waste Regs 2011, because that introduced the concept of the waste hierarchy. And all of you who deal with waste will know that in your waste transfer notes, you have to demonstrate that you've taken account of the waste hierarchy. So it's, it's a legal undertaking there, and it's a really critical thing. I'll do a bit more on the waste hierarchy, but what I would say right at this point is that if you go away from this session with absolutely nothing else, if you just ingrain in your mind thinking about getting up that waste hierarchy, you will achieve good things, you'll achieve better things. So just stepping onto permitting, and just to say that clearly when you start to treat waste as resource, and therefore you might have to move stuff aside and keep stuff for use on site or elsewhere, lots of issues come around regarding permits and exemptions. We're not going to dig into that too much, but you have to do it right, is what we would say. So focusing back into the legislation is a good thing. There's some great stuff on the school site regarding all of this, where you can conduct e-learning, and I'm sure you can get advice internally and externally as well. Then we move on to the, what are kind of colloquially known as the WE regs, so waste, electrical, and electronic equipment. And as we know from 2010, a polluter pays principle was introduced, where the organisations that creating that material became responsible for the collection, treatment, recycling, recovery of it. And that's again important, because a good principle that if that's the position you're in, theoretically at least you would look to minimise that amount. And that applies then across also to packaging, and we'll talk a lot about packaging again in this session. But the producer responsibilities obligations, or packaging regs, came in 2010, and that again placed the onus on the organisations to recover and recycle waste packaging, done really generally by the process of procurement of PRNs, which effectively is almost a tax against the packaging that's produced. And Scotland took a few steps ahead, because you can see there from that particular piece of legislation that they introduced a system where all organisations, whatever size they are, to recycle certain products, for instance, plastics, glass, card, metal, paper. That again is starting to point in the right direction, suggesting that these items are not stuff to be discarded. They're items that have a value and should be treated as such. So we now come to the waste hierarchy, and what I would say about the waste hierarchy is there are 5 general sections to it. So they're arranged there. So just in your mind's eye, stop for a minute and think where that would apply. And I'll ask you 2 questions. So which do you think is the most sustainable option in the waste hierarchy? And you can see 5 listed there. And when you've done that, which do you think is the least? So we're going to do that as 2 more Zoom poll questions now. And this is all anonymous, so don't worry if you get it wrong. Okay. What have we got? Yeah, it's good to see. So we got prevention coming out on top, and that's correct, because if you can eliminate the need to create that waste in the first place, if you can prevent it, clearly you've really dealt with the problem well. You've used less resource, and you haven't got waste to handle in any particular way. You haven't got that product to handle. So what about the least sustainable option? Okay, thank you. Yeah, disposal. You'll see that other recovery is mentioned there, and other recovery, if you think incineration or pyrolysis, so that's going to low down the waste hierarchy, but thinking that at least you recover a bit of energy when you burnt all that stuff, a lot of which might have actually been useful. But disposal is the one. And one thing we do know is that there are way less landfills available than there used to be, and it doesn't make a lot of sense to put good stuff in the ground. So started to turn that around slowly but surely. Okay, let's move on. So there's the hierarchy, where you prevent in the first place, If you can't prevent, then you consider how you can reuse that material for its intended purpose. So that's not recycling, that's thinking about actually reusing the product. So, you know, if you got timber that you ordered for a project and that timber's lying about on site and it didn't get used for the project, it's still timber. Don't whack it through a chipper, because that timber is good timber. Can that timber be reused? Just as an example. Packaging would be another classic one. Can you have reusable packaging that can pass back and forth to take away that single-use aspect? Then you drop to recycling, and if you can keep yourselves in that top 3 to 5 as much as possible, you will become more resource efficient. You can't fail to become more resource efficient before you get to the stage where your waste management contractor is taking that material away to have it incinerated or energy recovered through pyrolysis or any other method, with all the vehicle movements that involves, let alone the disposal side at the bottom of hierarchy. So probably telling some of you things that you're absolutely well aware of, but this is such a great thing to get across to people. And we're going to talk about circular economy, but please, you know, don't forget the waste hierarchy. It's the good old-fashioned waste hierarchy is a great thing to work with. So then we get into policy. And there's been lots of policy flying around, and it was somewhat stymied by obviously the horrendous last couple of years that we've been through. But in 2018, Her Majesty's government produced Our Waste, Our Resources, a strategy for England, and you'll see right there at the top of chapter 1. This is, you know, how long ago this was. Michael Gove was Environment Minister. So if you go across there, you can see circular economy mentioned right at the top there, the sustainable production, and we'll dig into more of that in a bit. But it's not just about England. If you go right the way across the United Kingdom, so good things happening in Wales. There's a circular economy strategy for Wales. Again, you know, look at the date, 19th of December 2019. Slightly less stuff happening in Northern Ireland, but Scotland really stepped forward. And you know, I think lots of things have kind of caused that to be the case. That you know, we can kind of surmise about the issues of developing greater self-sufficiency, but you can also talk about some thinking. So we'll talk about the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, and Dame Ellen MacArthur, name I'm sure all of you know, set up the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, became kind of circular economy czar for Scotland. 2016, Scotland was moving forward with that. 2019, there are the proposals, again stymied by lockdown and all the absolute priorities that came through for lockdown, but more to follow on that. I'll show you a few more things, but other stuff happening around the whole UK. So if you go into the London plan, so if you think about the area of London broadly inside the M25, any large construction project is obliged now to produce a very, very detailed and specific circular economy statement, which will include all sorts of things, but for instance, all including how the project will enable building materials and components to be disassembled and reused at end of life. So that then begs the question all the way back to the design stage, that you have to, if you haven't thought about that at the design stage, when you actually come to take things apart and reuse them and refurbish them, life's going to be harder, and that's when, you know, demolition kind of comes in and stuff has to be crushed and carted off. So big step in the London plan. And my understanding, or perhaps more opinion than understanding, is that kind of methodology, that kind of process will be uptaken in all of the major conurbations across the UK over the next few years. So what you see happening in London, you can expect to see happening elsewhere. There's also the EU and UK circular economy strategy and package, which kind of flows into various aspects of the Environment Act 2021, which has finally kind of made it through the Lords and Commons. And the Environment Act has a framework for, you know, increasing the kind of powers, make regulations around hazardous waste, import, export, transit, making it much harder to send our dirty stuff halfway around the world for somebody else to become somebody else's problem. Even litter enforcement powers. And there's stuff under consultation here. We'll see this start to flow out over the next year or two. It will be much more powerful, I think, and will drive us in the direction of more self-sufficient. And a great thing that kind of points to that as well is the extended producer responsibility for packaging, which effectively is a producer pays process. So we're going to see much more focus around packaging, a real drive to reduce packaging, and we'll dig into that now. Okay, just a few more things. So here you can see, I'll let you just read the words rather than me read them for you, but I'll just say a few things over the top. But this is the planning programme for the government in Scotland, and it specifically mentions the circular economy, and it specifically kind of indicates that issue of making sure that stuff is designed to last for as long as possible and make the best use of it, repair, reuse, recycling. Very important. That then also flows to the draft 4th National Planning Framework for Scotland. Again, a really critical document. The school has a great partner in Zero Waste Scotland, who you can see mentioned there. They're a fantastic organisation. I recommend you look at their stuff, because it really is good. Very practical for anybody involved around the built environment and other areas too. And then you've got PASS in Scotland, who are focusing on that, developing responses to this planning framework. So if you're the kind of organisation that responds to things, and even if you're not the organisation that typically would respond to things, take a look at this and give a response. Your response doesn't have to be 100 pages, but understand what is being said in the nature of the plans and intentions for land use, really, in Scotland, because it's going to be incredibly important. Something else that kind of sneaked in really in the middle of last year, in 2021, was right to repair. Now, right to repair is, to some extent, it's like almost like a popular movement, and this has kind of grown around the continual frustration that you cannot get stuff fixed economically, and sometimes you cannot get it fixed at all. I'll give you an example from life. I went upstairs to adjust our boiler the other afternoon. It's got a small pinhole leak, so there's a tiny amount of water coming out. It's a little bit of plastic. To get that little bit of plastic replaced, I've just been quoted over £400. So that, then you get into the world, in a commercial world, where you think, well, if you're going to be quoted that much to repair something, and it's going to be that much fuss, isn't it easy to just get a new one in? And that isn't great, because that means that product is almost certainly going to end up not with a great fate. I'm going to bite the bullet and pay the 400 quid and hope I get a few more years out of the boiler. But that's another matter. But it's a practical example of right to repair and how it should work. So what was done in the summer was the obligation was put down on the manufacturers of white goods to ensure that they were repairable at sensible cost, so that A, they could be repaired, and B, they would be fixed relatively easy, and to extend the lifespan of products by up to 10 years. And that becomes important, because if we can extend the lifespan of things, we're making better use of those scarce resources. So again, I think this might be an area of policy that moves into the parts of our world. So you could easily see this going into the world of, power tools, for instance, or, lots of other areas. So we'll see what happens. Something that you might find useful is this. This was produced only recently. So Construction Leadership Council and Green Construction Forum pulled together the route map for zero avoidable waste in construction. I mentioned that we're looking at reducing practical resources to reduce whole project life cycle waste in a construction built environment sense, and we're using this as the basis because it's a kind of great basis. What happens with this document is you can go anywhere in here. So if you can see the stages, so you've got pre-construction through to materials choices, through to the actual construction process itself, in use, and the ultimate end of life of that part of the built environment. Some targeting stuff around landfill measurement and management. And when you click on one of these boxes, what happens is you get something like this. So here we have designing out waste, and you can see some objectives set and aims for the 20s, 30s and 40s. And you can see down the right-hand column things that could be done. So things that, theoretically or actually could be done. And when you click on the guidance button, it will take you to Some real good practical examples of guidance. In fact, some of those are from the schools, some from Zero Waste Scotland, and so on and so forth. But the thing that people, organisations get the most benefit from is practical examples of somebody else attacking a problem and solving it. And we really, really do need that to become more resource efficient. So take a look at that, an opportunity. So there's what I'd said before, which is that the school is actually going to take this forward. And if you've got great examples to include, we'd love to see them. Right, it's taken me this long. It's taken me to just gone 12:30 to get to the circular economy. So I'm going to talk about circular economy now. So here is the definition. This is the definition from WRAP, Waste Resources Action Programme, who some of you may already be familiar with. And it says that a circular economy is an alternative to a traditional linear economy. That's where you make stuff, you use it, and then you chuck it away when you're bored with it, or you want a different colour, or it's gone out of fashion, or it doesn't work anymore because you can't fix it. And instead of doing that, you keep those resources in use for as long as possible. You get the absolute maximum value from those resources whilst in use, and then you recover and regenerate products and materials at the end of each service life. Now we'll unpick that here. So that's what it looks like in diagrammatic form. This is nice and simple, actually. So we can't, unless we magic stuff Harry Potter style, we actually have to grow it or fish it out of the seas, or mine it, or quarry it. And that's where our raw material comes from, different kinds of things. So those raw materials are then designed into components. Those components go into a manufacturing process, become products. The products are consumed, and the whole thing's chucked away at the end. That's a linear economy. What circular economy does is it says you will start your thinking process right at the very beginning. So you will think with maximum value and use in mind right from the start. So that relates to the materials choices that you take. So your raw materials might be not so raw materials. They could be recycled content materials, materials recovered from other stuff at end of life. That flows into the design process, it flows into the manufacturing process and the consumption, just as you can see above. But then you enter into a maintenance phase where because the product, whatever that product is, has been designed in a way that it can be maintained, it is maintained because somebody's thought about it early enough along the line to actually do that. Then it goes into kind of reuse and refurbishment, because you'll hit the point where you can't maintain something entirely in its present state. And the built environment is a classic example of that, because people's and users' needs change. So you then have to go into reuse and refurbishment and making more significant changes. But you don't have to throw out the baby with the bathwater. You can actually, if you've designed properly at the start, you can actually strip out and strip in with more ease, because somebody's thought about that in the first place. And then when components or even the whole, it's the end of its service life, there is a logical route in terms of recycling and back into the loop, circular. So if we look at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation and the 3 principles that they state, there is it written down. First, driven by design. So design is so critical to this. Eliminate waste and pollution. Circulate products and materials at their highest value. So it's it's like a value proposition, this, think about it that way. And critically, regenerate nature. So we can't just keep stripping stuff away because we'll run out of stuff in the end. So we have to be conscious of our natural environment as well. Underpinned by a transition to renewable energy and materials. So this is again important, because it's important not to just think of the circular economy as recycling, because it's more than that. But it isn't that clever, really. It's just common sense. So you think about the way you do things as well as the things you do. So the move from a lot of the organisations on this call to change their fleet activities, to move to hybrid working, those sorts of things, they're all circular ways of thinking. They're reducing use of resources, and it's resilient. Here's what it looks like in a very complicated looking picture. So on the left hand side you have the biological nutrients, so the stuff that's farmed or fished or grown. On the right hand side you've got the stuff that's mined or quarried. and I'll deal with the right hand side because that's the easiest one to kind of work with the example. You can see that the raw materials go to a parts manufacturer, product manufacturer, service provider, and an end user. Then instead of dropping out the bottom and maybe being incinerated or landfilled, which is not great use of resources, you have these loops of righteousness that are going to actually keep the product in use for much longer. So you've got a maintenance cycle built in. When maintenance becomes impractical, the sums don't add up, or the needs have changed, then you move to kind of a reuse or redistribution. It might be that something that you have no longer has a value to you, will definitely have a value to somebody else. So rather than skip it, find that somebody who can find the value in that product. You may even get something back for it. Think about reuse, redistribution, and then get into the recycling side, and that all drops back into the top again. So that is your circular economy in a nutshell. Is it new? Well, not really. I turned 60 last year, and so I'm old enough to remember these kind of reprobates in black and white, and I'm sure some of you do, and maybe stick it in the chat if you can remember, or the Q&A if you can remember what the names were, just to make me not feel lonely in that context. But I'll give that 2 seconds, and if nothing happens, I'll tell you. So the bottom one is good old Benny Hill. As Ernie, the fastest milkman in the West. And if you actually if you unpick the concept of a milk round, what could be a more circular way of working? You've got a product that people need and use, delivered in a reusable container that can be reused time after time after time again, and in an electric powered vehicle. And that's all those years ago. So, you know, what a pioneer Ernie was. You know, we should all be grateful to him for the circular economy. And if you get to Steptoe and Son up at the top, so thank you for that. Just the principle, you know, it's a little bit facetious, but the principle that actually everything has a value to somebody generally. It's just if you think about waste as materials in the wrong place at the wrong time, still materials. That's the principle. I get accused of this at home. You know, you keep hanging on to things because they might come in sometime, but you know, sometimes those things do come in, and you'll never see a poor scrap merchant, that's for sure. So I will move on. So in principle and in practice, circularity is way more than just recycling. So you can get around the idea that it's more than that. Start with the principle: do you need it in the first place? Can you eliminate the need? Can you design it better so it works better? Can you fix it? Are you able to repair it so you can keep it in use or keep some of it in use? If you don't need it, can somebody else use it? Or can you retain more value in what you have? You know, the products or the service. Is there a way of just retaining the value over time? Can you save time and money in what you do? Can you be lean? Because the principles of lean and the principles, you know, we have whole sections in the school and elsewhere around kind of lean management principles that really fits to circular economy. It's just about being a bit more thoughtful and a bit more resource efficient. And you know, we won't take giant steps straight away in this. We have to test things out, but we'll have to get better at this. I just this up because when I run workshops, I often sort of ask people what they think about these. We've just been through a couple of years like no other. And, you know, if you look at those pictures there, so what's become more circular or less circular, I would argue that shriveled up pepper in the fridge would have looked slightly more appealing, you know, at the heart of lockdown when you couldn't get pepper for love nor money, and you would find something to do with it. PPE was something there was a necessity to bring it in at any cost, and not particularly circular and not particularly resource efficient at all. But as time goes on and we get to the idea of living with a slightly more protected way, and I think that that will continue to a greater or lesser extent, we have to rethink the PPE issue and think about potential reuse in some contexts and recyclability and ways to eliminate the problem by the way in which we set up our way of working, so that we can take it out of the equation. So that's a bigger topic for another day. I'll just put that one there, and the whole kind of area around. I will click through these so you can see there the concept of composting. You'll see there the the concept of dropping something on the floor because it didn't have a value and you didn't stop, and you certainly wouldn't pick up somebody else's old PPE. And I'll stop there because I don't know if anybody else tried to buy a bike in lockdown or get spare parts, but it was quite difficult. It was better to fix what you had if you couldn't get a new one. And bikes were pretty high on the agenda in lockdown because they widened our horizons, and a lot of us have kept them, and that's a good thing. And the last one, just about how we move stuff around from A to B and back again. I think we've all seen a bit of this, you know. It's hard to run a Zoom call without getting a knock on the door halfway through because you're taking a parcel for somebody else. If you're working from home, that's how it works. So there's good and bad in these methods, but there are changes. Now the financial case. So what we know is that waste costs, and it costs us quite a lot. So a lot of waste is generated by our industry still. It's growing, the amount is growing rather than going down. And the tax that was brought in, the landfill tax, to kind of, you know, begin to kind of clamp down on this, hasn't really done the job in that respect. It's just become a tax for the exchequer. It currently sits at just under £100 a tonne, but that's not the reason why people, you know, would start or stop wasting stuff. And we'll look into that more. Less for inert waste as well, of course. So research has been done, and it's been followed up recently by a school partner, Zero Waste Scotland, which looks at the contributing factors to the true costs of waste. So just while we're on it, just put your considerations on what you think would make a £300 skip deliver £2,400 worth of cost to a business, because that's what the information tends to show. And has done on, you know, several reevaluations. So just put your thoughts on that in there, but I'm sure you can guess some of the things that are going in there. Yeah, I can see some points going into the chat. So here we go. So let's think about it. Somebody has to manage that waste. That's a cost. The more waste you've got, the more waste you've got to manage, the more cost. Somebody has to store that waste. The more storage you've got, the more that storage costs. Somebody has to find a way, has to manage the storage of that waste, damage raw materials, all the effort that goes into making things to damage them and then throw them away before they even get used for their intended purposes. That is not great business. So that relates to site waste management planning. Good to see plenty of stuff pinging into the chat on this. I almost daren't look at it because I'll get sidetracked and I'm on a time scale. Designing waste, or design-driven waste rather. So we design products in a way that is inherently wasteful. I've been working with a house builder who's just lowered the height of the roofs in their standard Oxford style house because it enables them to use 2.4 timber rather than 3 metre timber and have a 0.6 of a metre offcut for every bit of wood that they use, which is disappointed the people who have you know, stoves at home because they're not getting the timber for it, but and that's another story. But it's great in terms of resource efficiency. It also saves somebody having to cut that timber because it just goes straight in, so you've taken out that as well. Wasted energy, labour, time. An iceberg. There is so much to the cost of waste beyond the price of that skip, that transaction. Here's the work by Zero Waste Scotland that shows it. So they investigated. It's useful to look at a house because you know, we might not understand all kind of construction environments or commercial environments, but most people, you know, we can all get a grip of what a house is and the kind of things that a house is made of. And what they found when you know, doing effectively a skip dive was that and working out the values is that the waste that was in the skip, 30% was insulation. Offcuts of insulation or full bits that weren't used. 15% was timber, 14% was plastic, 7 metal, and a whopping 30% packaging. And you can see the sources of that material on the other side. So unrecovered packaging taking up huge volume in a skip, and you know, damaged stuff and cutting waste in there as well. And the condition showed that, yeah, by the time it had hit the skip, you know, nearly 50%, 42% was only good for landfill, but there was a 40% there that was suitable for recycling and recycling use, and some of it was reusable in its current state. all roads lead to carbon, so you have to think about carbon when you think about waste, because everything factors in. So this is just a cut from the DEFRA greenhouse gas conversion factors, which is a way in which you can convert waste into the carbon that is generated by that waste, depending upon the way in which you've treated or dealt with that waste material. There's a lot more kind of sophisticated stuff on the way with this one, and I think we can fully expect to see big changes in this area, because the focus has kind of been to carbon. Actually, everything relates to carbon. So what have we got? We've got all that wasted material, we've got all those needless vehicle movements, we've got all that wasted time. We could have been doing something more productive. We just could have been doing something better, and that's where circular economy comes in. This affects business reputation, it affects business brand, very critically. Importantly, we have to think about where our stuff is coming from, because we're going to be given a significant reminder at the moment that where we go and get some of the things that we routinely rely on to go about our business, those routes might not be so easy. So we have to become more self-sufficient in the round, and it's good business to be thinking that way, becoming a bit more circular. Just a few examples to finish with. So this is from the 2018 waste strategy that I showed you from the UK government before, and you can see a case study from Skanska. Significant amount of work done on waste disposal savings, including a recycling method for renal dialysis bottles, which would otherwise have been incinerated at a significant cost. Sony down at the bottom, actually they have ahead of the right to repair. For years they've done a economic fix on the consoles that are used, and whereas a lot of our kids would scorn the old console, you give it 5 years, that'll become a cult item and they'll want it back. Specific issue to focus on is the plastic packaging tax. This is a big one, because the tax will add a tax of £200 per tonne on any plastic packaging manufactured or imported into the UK that does not contain at least 30% recycled content. We've been working quite closely with HMRC on this, on consultation and some of the information. The built environment is not ready for this tax. Everything I've seen tells me that the built environment has work to do. So we've got some stuff online you can look at, and there's some fantastic stuff from HMRC. But let's just ask another poll question. So the poll question is, what percentage of plastics production do you think is packaging? This is globally. Okay. So most thinking near half, 44%. Not many thinking 7%, and a reasonable proportion thinking 26%. Okay, next question, please. Which is, so what percentage of plastics waste globally is packaging? I told you I'd bang on about packaging. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's good. So here are the answers. So Ellen MacArthur Foundation on the left-hand side, 26% of the total volume of plastics used turned into packaging, and yet that's 60-odd% of waste in terms of plastics is packaging. So we don't value plastic packaging. It's been thrown away for too long. So we either need to eliminate it or to get better at reuse and recycling to become more circular. Finally, a couple of examples from school members. You may be familiar with Protec and their Proplex product maybe. This is temporary flooring. So if you think about the kind of corrugated material that's used for making boards outside, estate agents use outside houses, feels like that. So that's a circular product. So through Proplex, you can actually buy the Proplex. You can even have it branded up, and when you've finished with it, it can go back. It can be backhauled using really sophisticated means in terms of the logistics and go back into making more complex. It's a circular closed loop. There's a great example from Whitecroft Lighting, where they went into Cheshire Police Headquarters, and working in situ, they were able to actually reuse a lot of the lanterns you can see there. They could fix them. They could fit different kind of materials that would save raw material, would save packaging, would save energy. They were able to do it all with the minimum of inconvenience to Cheshire Police. And it's just a great project. And on the back of that, they launched a spin-off circular business called Whitecroft Vitality, which contains Ellen MacArthur's principles. You can see there: design and manufacture, life through utility, and regeneration and recovery. I'm sure you can think of examples of circularity in your own business. Stick them in the Q&A, and if we've got a chance, we'll answer them. But I know that SSEN will be very interested in what you have to say in that area. Now, where's all that going? Well, just go with the hierarchy. If nothing else, go with the hierarchy, because it will really help you. So get into that prevention and reuse side of things. Stop waste happening. But also, you know, think about circularity. If we're going to talk about the circular economy, don't just think about it as recycling. Think about it as the way you deliver stuff, the energy that you use or don't use, the efficiency of your operation, the relationship you have. Can you turn your product into a service? So instead of selling a product to somebody, can you sell a service with KPIs related to that service, and you be responsible for the main maintenance? Can you go into modern methods of construction and off-site manufacturing, take things, make them more efficient? All of those will benefit circularity. There's loads of extra content on the school library. You can find all that if you've got your school login, which hopefully you have by now. Absolutely brilliant. You can go and find that stuff. I mentioned our map. You can see that there. And there's also a great resource from UK Green Business Council, which is the Circular Economy Actor and Resource Map. Millions of resources there. So no shortage of stuff.